the communication is so key because it's working out a way to put language and measurement and outcome to sometimes things that are quite intangible.
If we don't take note of what's happening, if we don't keep track and measure, then we're never going to be able to put those pieces together in a really healthy way.
I often found that putting story around a stat made it come to life.
And the more that we can share stories, the more that I think, we can just remember that every single story represents a person and every single person matters to God.
Yeah, so good.
And so capturing these stories are they're really, really important.
Good to have you back with us. You are listening to Welcome to Ministry. This is a podcast brought to you by the BUV Generations Network, and we are so excited you are here listening to us. Now, Ads, you are here with me. Introduce yourself.
My name's Adam Southwood, pastor at New Hope Baptist Church, part of the wider Baptist family.
So good. And I am Kimberly Smith, and I work at the BUV Support Hub, and I am so keen for today's conversation because last week we were talking about position descriptions, super exciting stuff to think about, shaping what our role is, really big emphasis on communication and maybe a bit of a framework around, how we frame up what a paid position even looks like compared to a volunteer position.
My big takeaway from that week was that these position descriptions are outlining the things we need to get done, not the things that we need to do ourselves.
Come on.
Good.
Who said that?
I think it was a wise person in the podcast. It was great.
I think you might be right. But what we realise though is that your role and your ministry area, whatever it is, doesn't exist in a void.
No.
You're part of a bigger picture. You're part of a bigger vision.
Yeah.
Often your church has, quite a well-articulated vision, or it might not be so well-articulated.
Nice little mission statement somewhere. Yeah.
Somewhere, hopefully a poster or two in the foyer that lets us know what you're on about. But you as a ministry leader, as a paid ministry leader, pastor, you're oversighting this thing that exists within the bigger structure. So there's accountability to that bigger structure, and as much as there's the emphasis on let me do what only I can do and here's my area of passion or expertise, we've still got to be mindful of that bigger picture.
Yeah, totally. You're accountable to I think that the vision stuff gets us all inspired and excited, but we've got to execute, and there's accountabilities in that space. I think that one of my welcome to ministry experiences was realizing that I've got to manage a budget.
Right.
There's a business side to an organization. Like I've got to be responsible. I've got to steward that well.
My introduction to that was because I stepped into a role that didn't exist, and so no one had been managing that side of things, and also no one had been casting vision as such for that side of things. So one of my first questions is, what do you want your budget to be?
Yeah.
A lot, please.
Yeah, give me
all the lots. Just put the zeros on and just hand it over. It was hard trying to predict some of that stuff, and I was really lucky, really blessed, fortunate to have a treasurer who just had the best mindset around money and management and taught me a lot in that. And I never went without in that sense, but money is not my thing. Like budgeting is not my thing. Preempting what something's going to cost or what I might do in the future, that was a lot.
And there's this accountability tension within that, because you might set your budget at the end of the year. Next year you get to June, things are ticking along, and suddenly you've got this incredible idea that is going to change lives, going to change the world, and
transformation.
It's a great thing, and you haven't budgeted for it. And so it means that you've got to have some conversations with your treasurer or finance person or senior leader or whatever it might be. Because you can't just kind of do stuff out of nowhere. Like, things cost money and time, and I think probably a little bit linked back to the job description conversation that we had last week is that here at church in a vocational sense, you are paid out of tithes and offerings, and so there's a real requirement for us to be stewarding that well.
Yeah, for sure.
I heard this incredible quote that has really shaped my thinking in this space, and I don't just think of stewardship as being like just a good thing to do necessarily. I think of it as like a real honoring of our time, money, and resources, especially productivity in that space and working in church is good stewardship of your time, money, and resources.
Yeah, it's good.
I think that's Tim Challis from Do More Better that's written some of that.
Good stuff.
To find my thinking in that space, because suddenly you've got this ministry that's not in a void; it's a part of a bigger picture, and you've got the external expectation and pressures of people that we touched on a bit last week. But you got to get some things done, and so there might be some key performance indicators that people who are stewarding the space as well have decided that that's what we want to make. We want to, we'd like to grow to have, 30 kids come along to play group or to youth group or whatever. And you've now got to think strategically about how am I going to execute that? What things do I have to put in place to get that done? Or it's tricky.
Yeah, and as you say, a lot of conversation that needs to take place, particularly with uplines or bosses or senior pastors or whoever it is that is doing it. And I think the communication is so key because it's working out a way to put language and measurement and outcome to sometimes things that are quite intangible. Like we want our families to feel more connected. Okay, how do our families feel more what's the score out of 10, on that, or what's the metric
measure that?
That goes with it, or we want to see our young people, mature as disciples, and there's some indicators that you can put in there, but it can be a bit of a challenge to think through what are some of the steps that are going to head me in that direction that help me to say, yeah, we have moved, we have grown, we have improved, whatever it is that we're trying to achieve.
I always found a real tension in this space as I started processing it more and more in my early days in ministry, because a lot of the, when it comes to stats and measures, a lot of it's around like bums in seats, like how many people are rocking up, and this tension of like that doesn't paint the whole picture. It doesn't really describe discipleship necessarily, or spiritual growth, or whatever. And a lot of my early days were in the COVID season, so that was a very different thing. But I found myself going, I still need to be aware of it and across it though. It's still good to see what are the patterns, like why is it that every time I run a youth night like this, people don't rock up? Like what's going on? Do I need to do some more discipling in this space? Or am I just running, is this theme just boring and I need to change it?
Are we at the wrong time or the wrong place? Or
totally. And if we don't take note of what's happening, if we don't keep track and measure, then we're never going to be able to put those pieces together in a really healthy way. And I think that eventually we will find measures that relate to your ministry and your context that can be those measures that you can look at really wisely. McDonald's does this really cool thing. Cool, it might be an interesting word here. They actively track the amount of Happy Meals that they're selling.
Right.
Because a Happy Meal equals a future customer because they're being indoctrinated into the world of McDonald's. And they probably don't use language quite that strong, but you get what I mean. It's this indicator of where our business is going, how things have.
We've captured a client.
Totally.
Essentially, yeah.
And so after probably 3-4 years being in the space, my Happy Meal measure that I was looking at in youth ministry was how many new people are becoming regulars.
Right.
So how many people are making that leap from coming to my friend's youth
Yeah.
to I'm coming to my youth.
Right.
Like how many
Not
people
a
are
visitor
feeling
anymore.
it? Yeah.
Yeah.
And even that, especially in the past, 3-4 years, has gotten really interesting to measure because people's own definitions of belonging is shifting. We used to call someone a regular if they rocked up to a youth group every single week. The reality that we face now in many parts of the church around the world is that people aren't attending every single week, yet they still fully consider themselves a regular,
Right.
fully consider themselves involved. That can make planning really hard sometimes because, there might be X amount of youth that you are regularly engaging with, investing in, who you care for, who are on the books as regulars, yet you only see half of that number on any given week because life's flows and rhythms are just different. And so that's why I think that you got to find those happy meal stats that tell the story of growth and development and however you want to focus that.
Yeah. It's an interesting one because it is a number, but it's attached to a story.
Yes.
So because the number of Happy Meals isn't the measure, it's the story, but you do have a number to add. Because I think that's the challenge that we always face. As you say, what is it, bums
and seats.
Bums, bucks and buildings, I think is the phrase, like the people, money, infrastructure, kind of like there's ways that we can measure those things that are a little bit external or, just more practical. But we do want to have an awareness of what's going on, if we're growing, if we're reaching. Who are we reaching? What is if we're being faithful stewards of the money and the resources and the spaces that we have, and that is it can be a little bit of a challenge to work out what it is. And I think what that measurement might be. I think each person or each team that can look quite different because the type of leader you have, the type of leaderboard that you have. What it is that's going to motivate them or what it is that they're looking for goes back to our last week's conversation, the clarity of terms.
Yeah.
When I say this, what do you hear? But I often found that putting story around a stat made it come to life. So rather than we had 2 people come to our invite a friend day in kids ministry last week, it's like, that kid X who was talking to his mum they said this and they went to the neighbour and then this happened and then they brought 2 friends along. That there's a story there that's a whole family and there's all these layers of mission and ministry wins taking place there. Someone's talking to their neighbour, someone, family got connected and now these 2 people have shown up. And so what might appear to be quite a boring stat, just 2 people. No, like that's significant. It's the result of quite a lot of other good things happening. I mean, if people are inviting their friends to your church, there is no greater advertisement, if you like,
Word of mouth.
For your church. I mean, it's the net promoter score. I don't know if you've heard that in that language. The net promoter score is essentially measuring how likely are you to promote it to someone else. Like So how likely are you to recommend this to a friend? If you engage with the Australia Post or your bank or something like that, Woolworths, often, online, that's the question they ask. How likely are you to recommend us to a friend or suggest that they use the platform? So that net promoter score, I mean, it's pretty tacky language probably in terms of how we would like to use it in our context, but that is a huge measurement because it's such a deep trust exercise. I think that my church, my ministry, this program, these people are okay enough that I'm going to stake my reputation and my friendship to say, I think you should come. Like that's massive. I don't think we give that the credit that it deserves because if then I bring them and we don't deliver on that, I might have done my dash. I might have at least put a significant dent in the trust that person has or my likelihood to invite again. But there's a metric there, isn't there, of that likelihood of invitation, and even if the invitation is happening and that they're not saying yes. Just the
Oh, yeah.
invitation is a good measurement.
Massive metric. We recently in some of our camps started to think about how can we try capture some of the stuff. Like we realize that story tells a greater picture.
Yeah.
But you need to set up mechanisms in order to capture
Capture
stories
stories,
because
yeah.
if you're chasing stories, it's never gonna it just kind of falls
missing
flat
stuff.
every time. You miss stuff. You feel like you're trying to force it. And so we gave all of our young people on a camp a feedback card.
Right.
Rate these things. Tell me a story.
Nice.
How did you hear God this week?
Right.
What impacted you? All of those little things helped not only give us some of the, insights into, this younger age group didn't enjoy that as much.
Yeah.
That's really interesting to go back and look at.
Yeah.
But also just these little stories of, I re-engaged with my faith this week.
Yeah.
We had a bunch of next steps down the bottom. And so it was like, I'm going to commit to reading my Bible again and stuff. And if we hadn't have done that, we wouldn't have been able to capture all those little stories and filter that in.
Yeah.
We've put a button on our church website where you can share a story, where we can try and capture some of that stuff in. And I think, especially in this measures space, the more we try to paint the picture of what's going on, get measures here and there, sometimes you find stories in the midst of that, and incredible stories. And the ones that you weren't looking for are always the most powerful.
Yeah.
We run a campaign every year for our Generations Ministries, in the camp space. Like, do you want to ask our church family, do you want to donate into this space, sponsorship, so that we can, send kids and leaders along to camp? When I was looking through some of the, stats of what had been given and that kind of a thing to kind of just know what we're dealing with, I realized that more than half of the monetary value of donations that had come through came from our youth leaders.
Right. Wow.
So not the people who you're expecting at all to necessarily have the funds in this space. And the truth is they don't. They just see the incredible impact that this had on their lives. They can't help but invest.
Wow.
What an incredible story that tells.
That's so cool.
So cool.
Yeah, because as you say, just where your money goes, it's a sign of your heart being invested. And what a great metric that turned out to be.
Yeah.
Surprisingly so, I'm sure.
And the more that we can share stories, the more that I think, we can just remember that every single story represents a person, and every single person matters to God.
Yeah, so good.
And so capturing these stories are they're really, really important.
That's an incredible story. And as I'm listening to that, I'm thinking how powerful a testimony is that to the rest of the church, to your senior leadership, to the team itself, to the youth.
Totally.
That's a story. I mean, it has numbers.
Yeah.
And so there's some really tangible metrics there. But also it's telling a story about what's happening in your area that's going to get your senior leadership and your leadership teams excited about what's going on, because it's a sign of movement and good discipleship and stewardship and heart
vitality
and all of the things. The vibe.
And just on vibe as well, sometimes I think that we downplay our own ability to read a space. It's like stories seem to be the only intangible measure that we really give credit to. You can walk into a space and read a feeling, right? Like I could walk into a uni and just go to vibe and go, I don't know if this place is actually for me, and then walk into another one and go, oh right, no, I feel really good about being in this space. And we can get the same when it comes to ministry context as well. And so sometimes it's very interesting when we've got an activity or something that's going on, or an event-based thing, and we're like, there's not as many people here as we were expecting. And, so on paper, the stat might be
a bit lower.
A bit lower. And, we can sometimes get down on ourselves about that because we have expectations going into stuff. We set goals. But then the vibe's really good. I'm like, there's something happening here, and that has to be captured. And sometimes I think we tell ourselves that, if we don't have a story, we can't validate it. But your vibe check tells a massive story as well because you're in tune. You're the one thinking and processing what's going on here. And in the same way, there's going to be some situations where, on paper, something might look really good, but you go, I don't know about that. I'm actually sensing and discerning something in my spirit that didn't land the way that I think it should have in my heart. And the next time we do that, even though this was good on paper and, logic might tell us we should redo the same thing in the exact same way because people, engaged or whatever, something was off. And we need to be very responsive to those things as well. I think it comes back to having a goal or some kind of value set when it comes to why are we measuring what we're measuring?
So that you're measuring against that. I think that too, as you're talking, I'm mindful of, I love to run workshops and you present a little bit of content and then you send them to tables or chat about this.
Yeah.
And I feel like I can gauge their level of engagement or their level of comprehension by how fast they talk. So sometimes you'll say, turn to your table, discuss this. And there's this sort of silence and then slowly someone goes, I think, and, as opposed to blah, 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 blah. It's like they've got it. They're ready to speak to it because I've carried them along. And as you say, that's not something that's necessarily externally measurable, but it's a feeling that there was good energy. They responded quickly or they didn't respond well to that bit. Maybe I was a little unclear or it wasn't as pertinent to them or, whatever the question is to ask of it. I think there is some value in doing the check of yourself.
Totally.
How do I feel? And even to check with other people to feed into that story. Key leaders, leadership team, or even someone external. As you've walked in here, what do you sense? Give me a perspective here that I might not have because I'm so deep in it that I haven't been able to step back and look at it from that external perspective.
Feedback, I'm sure, is something that we're going to touch on a few times in various aspects of all of our conversations. But I think especially when you've got a team around you in any given ministry context, you not being the only one that wears the weight of discerning the measurements or whatever else is going on, getting feedback from them and then getting a bit of a loop going as well because it's all good that I sit there and I've got my little dashboard and I've worked out how many of our newcomers have become regulars or whatever. That's all great. But unless I'm actually encouraging my team with that, it doesn't foster more growth.
May not translate,
right? It's just a thing that is. And so if we have a mindset or a goal around wanting to engage with more people in our community and see youth bring friends along and invite people and have them, but feel like they belong. There's a missing edge. The feedback loop doesn't complete if we don't encourage the people on the ground with that as well.
Yeah, that's good.
And so thinking about ways setting up the mechanisms for collecting feedback, but reporting on measures and stuff like that.
As I talk to pastors, I get excited when you hear, and it may be quite natural and innate to most people, but just the end of event review in the moment, what's going on? What did we hear? What did we see? What can we capture right then and there that will feed into all of this stuff, but also that includes everybody. So rather than the one person leaves with this great story, that we all get to hear it and we get a more collective sense of the night or the event or the day, whatever it was in that review process. And as you're doing that review, you are able to recalibrate. Remember our goal was this. Remember we said that we were hoping that this would happen, or we were wanting this to be more something than it was last time or better than last time, that you can give that quick feedback and just close that loop of action to outcome to say, because you did this, this is happening now. And it did make it the difference we were hoping it would, or it still didn't land. So let's see if we can try something else.
Piece is massive.
Yeah.
In this space of measures and assessing and evaluating as well, if you're stepping into vocational ministry and you're now, on a different end from being a key leader, you're going to see different parts of the night or the event or program or ministry or whatever it might be that you potentially haven't seen before. And so because, we're all about getting things done, not doing the things. Look at me learning still. And you're doing some, pastoral care in the background and other stuff. You might not see the unfolding of the thing that you planned or were a part of, and you might not be in every space the same way. And so the same vibe check that you could get early on as well is also slightly different because you're getting a vibe check from a completely different angle. And sometimes comparing those, I think, there's a real transition involved in figuring out how you feel about the night. And that's putting aside all of your own little identity pieces of I care about this because I was involved in this.
Yeah. And I think as we're saying all these things, we keep repeating this idea of the communication being so important. And I think probably as a wrapping up of this conversation, it's just that encouragement again to work out your communication with the people that you're reporting to, clarity around expectations, what's the ask, how do we know that we've achieved it, and then building into your own systems ways of measuring, vibe, feedback, actual money, stats that are helpful, and continuing to sort of stretch and grow and shift in that space so that you are able to capture the real story of what's going on, particularly as it pertains to being able to validate a budget spend or,
Totally.
Be clarifying that, yes, this ministry is doing what we as a church have commissioned this ministry to do, that it's making a difference, that, the money that we're investing into staff here is being well utilised because there's good things taking place there. It's good.
Love it. Well, it's been so great to continue the conversation with you another week. Keen to see you next time.